The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Thompson house, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Lily adjusted her silk blouse and checked her appearance one last time in the hallway mirror. At 34, she still turned heads with her sharp features and confident stance, though the long hours at the law firm had begun to leave faint shadows beneath her eyes. "Mark, did you call the agency?" she called out, slipping on her heels. "They're sending someone today, and I won't be here to meet them." Mark appeared from his home office, his dark hair slightly messy from running his hands through it while working on designs. At 36, he had the kind of good looks that improved with age, strong jaw, thoughtful eyes, and a build kept trim by morning runs. "Yes," for the third time he said, trying to hide his annoyance. "I cleared my schedule until noon, though I still don't see why we need help. The cleaning service comes twice a week already." Lily sighed, grabbing her briefcase. "The cleaning service doesn't stock the fridge or prepare meals, or make sure there are clean towels when I stumble in at midnight." She softened her tone, approaching him. "This promotion means more travel, more late nights. I don't want to come home to an empty fridge and a husband who's been living on takeout for days." Mark's resistance melted slightly when Lily pressed a quick kiss to his cheek, leaving behind the faint trace of her expensive perfume. Their marriage had become a well-choreographed dance of brief interactions and professional courtesy. They functioned well as partners, but the passion that once made them rush home to each other had dimmed to a comfortable, if somewhat distant, respect. "Fine," he conceded, "but no young college students or anyone who's going to reorganize my files or move my things." The doorbell rang precisely at 9. Mark opened it to find a woman in her early 30s standing with perfect posture, wearing simple black pants and a crisp white button-down shirt. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical bun, but a few strands had escaped to frame a face that was more striking than beautiful, high cheekbones, full lips, and large eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Mr. Thompson?" Her voice was warm and slightly husky. "I'm Rose Wilson from Premier Home Services. I believe you're expecting me." Mark stepped back, gesturing her inside. "Yes, please come in." Rose entered the house with measured steps, her eyes widening slightly at the soaring ceilings and expensive art. Though she maintained her professional demeanor, Mark noticed a hint of appreciation in her gaze that went beyond the standard reaction to wealth. She seemed to be noticing details, the craftsmanship of the staircase, the way light played across the space. "Your home is lovely," she said, but the way she said it made it clear she was complimenting the design rather than the price tag. Something about this made Mark stand a little straighter. "Thank you. I designed most of the renovations myself. I'm an architect." As they toured the house, Mark found himself pointing out features he was particularly proud of, things Lily had long since stopped noticing. Rose asked thoughtful questions that revealed a surprising knowledge of design. When they reached the kitchen, she ran her hand along the marble countertop with a touch that seemed almost reverent. "This is where I'll spend most of my time," she said with a small smile. "I hope you like simple food, Mr. Thompson. I believe the best meals let the ingredients speak for themselves." Mark found himself nodding, suddenly aware of the faint scent of lavender that seemed to surround her. "Call me Mark, please, and yes, I prefer simple food." As Rose began to discuss schedules and responsibilities, Mark realized with mild surprise that the tension in his shoulders had eased. For the first time in months, he was actually looking forward to coming home. 2 weeks passed quickly, and Rose settled into the rhythm of the Thompson household. Lily left for her business trip to Chicago, scheduled to be away for 5 days. The house felt different without her sharp clicks of heels on hardwood and her hurried phone conversations. Mark sat at the kitchen island one evening, sketching a new project. He had started working from home more often. He told himself it was to avoid the noisy renovations at his office, but he knew there was more to it. The house felt alive now. The scent of baking bread filled the air as Rose worked quietly nearby. "Is that a new building?" she asked, glancing over as she kneaded dough with strong, capable hands. Mark looked up, surprised by her interest. "Yes. A community center downtown. The city wants something modern, but I'm trying to keep some historical elements." Rose wiped flour from her hands and moved closer to see his sketch. Her shoulder nearly touched his, and he caught that now familiar lavender scent. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Reminds me of the library in my hometown. Where did you grow up? Mark asked, realizing he knew almost nothing about her. A small town up north. Nothing special, but we had this amazing old library. Her eyes grew distant with memory. I spent every afternoon there. The librarian taught me about architecture actually. She loved beautiful buildings. Mark found himself watching the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about something she loved. It was a quality he had almost forgotten existed, genuine passion. Lily's eyes hadn't lit up like that in years, except when discussing a case victory. Their evenings fell into a comfortable pattern. Mark would work at the island while Rose prepared dinner. They would talk about his projects, books they had read, or places they had visited. Simple conversations, but filled with the warmth that had been missing from his life. One night, he came home later than usual after a difficult client meeting. The house was quiet, but a covered plate waited in the oven. Next to it sat a folded note in Rose's neat handwriting. Rough day, wine in the fridge. Sometimes the best designs come after the hardest challenges. Mark stared at the note, feeling something stir in his chest. How had she known exactly what he needed to hear? How had she known he had a rough day at all? The next morning, he found Rose arranging fresh flowers in the living room. Morning light streamed through the windows, catching in her hair and turning the loose strands to gold. For the first time, he noticed she had a small scar near her temple, nearly hidden by her hairline. "Thank you for dinner last night," he said. "And the note." She turned, smiling. "You're welcome. Did the wine help?" "It did. But your words helped more." The admission felt dangerously intimate. Rose held his gaze for a moment too long before looking away. "I'm glad." That afternoon, Mark found himself at a florist, something he hadn't done in years. He chose wildflowers, not the carefully arranged roses he used to buy Lily on their anniversary. When he brought them home, Rose's surprise was genuine. "What are these for?" she asked, touching a blue petal gently. "For making this house feel like a home again," he said simply. A blush colored her cheeks. Their fingers brushed as she took the flowers, sending an unexpected jolt through him. He stepped back quickly, suddenly aware of a line being approached. That night, Mark lay awake beside his sleeping wife, who had returned from her trip exhausted and preoccupied. Lily's familiar perfume filled the room, expensive and carefully chosen. Yet all he could think about was the simple scent of lavender and fresh bread that now filled the rest of their home. He rolled away, troubled by the realization that he had started counting the hours until morning, when Lily would leave for work, and the house would belong to just him and Rose again. Lily's voice echoed through the hallway as she talked on the phone. She had been home for 3 consecutive days, a rare occurrence lately. Mark watched from his study as she paced the living room, arguing with someone about case details. She hadn't noticed the new arrangement of furniture that Rose had created, a cozier, more inviting space that Mark had immediately loved. "What happened here?" Lily finally asked during a break in her calls, gesturing around the room with a frown. "Everything's different." "Rose thought it would flow better this way," Mark said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "I like it." Lily's eyes narrowed slightly. "Well, I don't. It's too casual. This isn't a country cottage, Mark. We have clients over sometimes." "When was the last time we had anyone over?" The words came out sharper than he intended. Lily stared at him, then shook her head. "I don't have time for this. I have to prepare for tomorrow's deposition." She walked away, heels clicking on the hardwood floors, leaving Mark standing alone in the room that suddenly felt cold despite its improved layout. The next morning, Mark found Rose in the kitchen, her eyes red-rimmed. She was arranging the living room furniture back to its original position. "You don't have to do that," he said, stepping into the room. Rose gave a small, sad smile. Mrs. Thompson made it clear she preferred the original arrangement. "I liked your way better," he said, moving to help her. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same chair, and neither pulled away immediately. The contact sent warmth up his arm. "Mark," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think." The doorbell interrupted whatever she was about to say. Mark stepped back quickly, running a hand through his hair. "That must be the courier. I'm expecting drawings." Later that day, Mark received a call that threw his professional life into turmoil. His biggest client was pulling out of a major project, citing creative differences. The news hit him hard, not just professionally, but personally. The building had been his passion project for months. He sat in his home office, staring at the conceptual drawings spread across his desk, when a soft knock sounded at the door. Rose entered with a cup of coffee. "Bad news?" she asked, placing the cup beside him. "How can you tell?" She gave a gentle smile. "You have a crease here when you're worried." She briefly touched the spot between his eyebrows, her finger warm against his skin. Mark found himself telling her everything about the project, the client's objections, his own disappointment. Rose listened with complete attention, something Lily rarely did when he discussed work challenges. "May I see the designs?" she asked when he finished. He hesitated only briefly before showing her the drawings. Rose studied them carefully, her fingers tracing the lines. "It's beautiful," she said. "But maybe," she hesitated. "Tell me," he encouraged. "The entrance feels closed off. What if you opened it more, made it feel like it's embracing visitors rather than just allowing them in?" Mark stared at her, then back at his drawings. She was right. The client had mentioned something similar, but he hadn't really heard it. He grabbed a pencil and began sketching rapidly, modifying the entrance based on her suggestion. They worked together into the evening, Rose offering simple observations that triggered new ideas. Mark felt a creative energy he hadn't experienced in years. When the new concept finally took shape, he looked up to find her standing close, watching him with admiration in her eyes. "You're incredibly talented," she said softly. "This wouldn't have happened without you," he replied, his voice low. The air between them seemed to thicken. Mark became acutely aware of her proximity, the soft sound of her breathing, the way her lips parted slightly. For a moment he imagined closing the distance between them. The sound of a car door slamming outside broke the spell. Lily was home early. Rose stepped back quickly, her cheeks flushed. "I should finish dinner," she said, hurrying from the room. Mark sat alone, his heart racing, knowing something had just happened that couldn't be undone. A line hadn't been crossed, but it had been acknowledged, and in that moment he wasn't sure which was more dangerous. The weather forecast had predicted light rain, but instead a violent storm swept in that evening. Thunder shook the windows of the Thompson house as wind whipped through the trees outside. Mark sat in the living room, reviewing the revised designs he would present to the client tomorrow. Lily had called earlier to say she was staying at a hotel near the airport. Her flight back from New York canceled due to the storm. The lights flickered once, twice, and then the house plunged into darkness. Mark heard a small gasp from the kitchen, followed by the sound of something breaking. "Rose?" he called out, fumbling for his phone to use as a flashlight. "Are you okay?" He found her in the kitchen, carefully picking up pieces of a broken plate. The beam from his phone caught her face, revealing an expression of genuine fear. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaky. "The darkness. I don't do well with sudden darkness." Mark helped her clean up the broken pieces, noticing how her hands trembled slightly. "Let me find some candles," he said gently. They gathered candles from around the house, creating small pools of warm light in the living room. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, a strange intimacy grew in the flickering shadows. Rose seemed to calm as the room brightened with the soft glow of candlelight. "Better?" Mark asked, sitting on the couch across from her. She nodded, pulling her knees up and wrapping her arms around them. "I got trapped in a dark cellar when I was a child," she explained. "Ever since then, sudden darkness." "You don't have to explain," he said, but he wanted to hear more, wanted to know everything about her. The storm seemed to create a world apart, a bubble where just the two of them existed. Perhaps it was this feeling that loosened their tongues, made them share things they normally wouldn't. Rose told him about growing up in a small town, about studying art before family troubles forced her to drop out and find work. Mark found himself sharing his own abandoned dreams, the community-focused projects he had wanted to pursue before practical concerns pushed him toward more profitable commercial work. "I wanted to design spaces that brought people together," he admitted, "places that felt like home." "Like what you did with the community center design," Rose said. "That's why I recognized something special in it." The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by crashes of thunder that seemed to draw them closer with each boom. Rose moved to the same couch where Mark sat, so they could look at some sketches he'd made years ago of his dream projects. "These are beautiful," she said, leaning closer to see in the dim light. Her shoulder pressed against his as they bent over the drawings. The contact sent warmth spreading through him despite the cooling house. "No one has seen these in years," he said quietly. "Not even Lily." The mention of his wife's name hung in the air between them. Rose shifted slightly, creating a small space between them, but didn't move away completely. "Why don't you pursue these anymore?" she asked. Mark sighed. "Life. Mortgages. Expectations." He looked at her in the candlelight, her features soft and open. "Sometimes we lose track of what really matters." "It's never too late to find it again," she said softly. Their eyes met and held. Mark became aware of the sound of rain, the flickering shadows on her face, the slight part of her lips. Time seemed suspended. He reached out, almost unconsciously, to brush a strand of hair from her face. His fingers grazed her cheek, lingering there. Rose's breath caught audibly. Neither moved for what felt like an eternity. Then lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark white light. In that instant, Mark saw the same longing in her eyes that he felt in his heart. When darkness returned, the space between them had somehow shrunk. "Mark," she whispered, his name a question and a warning. His hand cupped her cheek fully now. "I know," he answered, though neither had actually spoken their thoughts aloud. The next crash of thunder covered the sound of his phone ringing on the table. By the time they noticed the missed call from Lily, the power had returned, flooding the room with harsh light that broke the spell of their candlelit world. The next morning carried the fresh scent of rain-washed streets, but inside the Thompson house, the air felt heavy with unspoken words. Mark and Rose moved around each other carefully, their eyes meeting briefly before quickly looking away. The almost moment from the night before hung between them like a delicate glass wall, transparent but unmistakably present. Lily arrived home before noon, bringing with her the sharp energy that always seemed to follow her. She dropped her bags in the entryway and kicked off her heels with a sigh of relief. "That storm was a nightmare," she said, running her fingers through her hair. "I called you last night." "The power was out," Mark explained, keeping his voice even. "I only saw the missed call when the electricity came back." Lily nodded absently, already scrolling through emails on her phone. "I have good news," she said. "That Collins case is finally settling. We should celebrate." She looked up at him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maybe dinner out tonight? Just the two of us." Mark heard Rose moving quietly in the kitchen, probably pretending not to listen. "Sure," he said. "That sounds nice." Later, as Mark prepared for dinner, he caught a glimpse of Rose placing folded laundry in the bedroom. She looked different, her hair pulled back severely, her expression carefully blank. "Rose," he said, his voice low. "About last night." "Please don't," she interrupted, not meeting his eyes. "It was the storm, the darkness. Nothing happened." She placed the last towel in the drawer and turned to face him. "But it shouldn't happen again." "I know," he agreed, though the words felt hollow. "I've been thinking." Rose hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "I should give my notice. 2 weeks should be enough time for Mrs. Thompson to find a replacement." The words hit Mark like a physical blow. "You don't have to do that." "I do." Her voice was gentle but firm. "You know I do." That evening at the restaurant, Mark watched Lily across the table. She looked beautiful in the soft lighting, animated as she described her courtroom victory. He tried to focus on her words, but his mind kept drifting back to Rose's face in the candlelight. "Mark? Are you listening?" Lily's question pulled him back to the present. "Sorry," he said. "Just tired. Tell me more about the case." Lily studied him for a moment, then set down her wine glass with deliberate care. "You know what? Let's not talk about work. We always talk about work." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Let's talk about us instead." The gesture, so uncharacteristic, caught him off guard. "What about us?" "I've been thinking about our vacation plans. What if we extended it? Make it 2 weeks instead of 1. We could go to that resort in Bali you've always wanted to try." She smiled, a genuine smile this time. "Consider it a second honeymoon." The old Mark would have jumped at the chance. But now, looking at his wife's hopeful expression, he felt only a dull ache. He realized with startling clarity that somewhere along the way, they had become strangers who shared a house, a name, and little else. "Lily," he said slowly, "when did we stop talking? Really talking, like we used to?" Her smile faltered. "What do you mean? We talk all the time." "No, we exchange information, we coordinate schedules. We don't talk about things that matter anymore." Lily withdrew her hand, her expression closing. "Is this about Rose?" The question hung in the air. Mark felt his heart rate quicken. "What makes you ask that?" "I'm not blind, Mark." Her voice was quiet but steady. "I've seen how you look at her, how the house feels different when I'm home now." She took a deep breath. "Have you slept with her?" "No," he answered truthfully. "Nothing like that has happened." "But you want it to," Lily said. It wasn't a question. Mark couldn't bring himself to lie. His silence was answer enough. Lily closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were dry but filled with resignation. "I think I've known for a while that we were drifting apart. I just didn't want to see it." She reached for her wine, took a sip. "So what now?" 2 days passed in estranged, tense quiet. Rose continued her work with perfect professionalism, but the warmth that had filled the house was gone. She spoke only when necessary, her eyes always focused somewhere past Mark's shoulder. He felt her absence even when she was in the same room. Lily had called a temporary truce at the restaurant. "Let's take some time to think," she had said. "This isn't something we should rush." She had moved into the guest bedroom without fanfare, simply gathering her things while Mark was in the shower. Mark stood in his home office, staring at his revised designs for the community center. The client had loved the changes inspired by Rose's suggestions. The project was back on, more exciting than before, but the victory felt hollow without her smile to share it with. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Rose stood in the doorway, holding an envelope. "I wanted to give you this," she said formally, extending the envelope. "My official notice, and some recommendations for replacements from the agency." Mark took it without opening it. "You don't have to leave." "We both know I do." For the first time in days, she met his eyes directly. "Mrs. Thompson knows. Even if nothing happened, even if nothing ever happens, she'll always wonder." He stepped closer. "Lily and I had a long talk. Our marriage has been in trouble for years. It's not about you. But it is in a way." Rose's voice was gentle. "I was the catalyst. I made you see what was missing." They stood in silence, the space between them charged with unspoken feelings. Mark could hear the ticking of the clock, the distant sound of a car passing. He wanted to reach for her but kept his hands at his sides. "Where will you go?" he asked finally. A small smile touched her lips. "I've been saving for art classes. I thought I might try again, see if I still have any talent." "You do," he said with certainty. "I've seen how you arrange flowers, how you transformed our home. You see beauty in things others miss." Her eyes softened at the compliment. "Thank you for that." Another awkward silence fell. There was too much to say and no right way to say it. That evening, Lily found Mark sitting alone on the back porch. She sat beside him, wrapped in a cardigan against the evening chill. "I got an offer today," she said without preamble. "Senior partner at the London office." Mark turned to look at her. "London? When would you start?" "They want me there next month." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm going to take it." He nodded slowly, feeling neither surprise nor sadness, only a quiet acknowledgement of the inevitable. "It's what you've always wanted." "Yes. And you've always wanted to design buildings that matter, not just make money." She looked at him with unexpected tenderness. "We've been pulling in different directions for years." "When did we stop being a team?" he asked. Lily shrugged. "I don't know." Gradually, and then suddenly, she touched his hand briefly. "I don't hate you, you know. Part of me wishes I could. It would be easier. I never wanted to hurt you." "I know." She stood, wrapping the cardigan tighter. "I've scheduled movers for next week. I'll stay with Jessica until I leave for London." Her eyes held a question. "Will you be okay?" He nodded. "Eventually." The next morning, Mark found the house unnervingly quiet. Rose had left early to handle some personal matters, and Lily was meeting with her lawyers. He wandered through the rooms, feeling unmoored. In the kitchen, he found a small envelope propped against the coffee maker. Inside was a business card for an art gallery and a note in Rose's neat handwriting. They're having a student show next Friday. I signed up. Mark stared at the card, running his thumb over the embossed lettering. He thought about Rose pursuing her dreams, about Lily following hers to London. He thought about his own life, suddenly wide open with possibilities and uncertainties. He realized that loving someone didn't always mean you got to keep them. Sometimes it meant watching them find their path, even if it led away from you. But sometimes life gave second chances in unexpected ways. The art gallery buzzed with conversation and the gentle clink of wine glasses. Mark stood near the entrance, feeling oddly nervous. He adjusted his tie and scanned the crowd for a familiar face. It had been nearly 3 months since Rose had left the Thompson house, 3 months since Lily had moved to London. The divorce papers had been signed with surprising civility, both of them acknowledging that they had grown in different directions. The community center was under construction now, Mark's revised design bringing to life the welcoming space he had always envisioned. He had scaled back his commercial work, focusing instead on projects that genuinely excited him. His house felt different. He had rearranged the furniture again, this time finding his own style somewhere between Lily's formal elegance and Rose's cozy warmth. Mark moved deeper into the gallery, pausing to look at the student artwork. He recognized Rose's style immediately, a series of watercolors depicting ordinary spaces transformed by light and shadow. A simple kitchen table bathed in morning sun, a park bench under autumn trees, a window seat during a rainstorm. Each painting managed to make the everyday feel sacred somehow. And then he saw her, standing in the corner, talking with an older woman. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Her hair was different, shorter now, with soft waves framing her face. She looked happy, more confident than he remembered. She turned, as if sensing his presence, and their eyes met across the room. Time seemed to pause as recognition, surprise, and something else flickered across her face. She said something to the woman beside her and made her way through the crowd. "You came," she said simply when she reached him. "I wouldn't have missed it," he replied. "Your work is beautiful." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you. I'm still learning, but," he gestured to the paintings, "it feels right." "It is right," he said with certainty. "You have a gift." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, surrounded by strangers but acutely aware of only each other. "How is Mrs. Thompson?" Rose asked politely. "Lily's in London now, senior partner at her firm." He hesitated. "We're divorced." "Oh," her eyes widened slightly. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was time. We both knew it." Mark took a breath. "And you? How have you been?" Rose smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. "Good. Busy with classes. I'm working part-time at a small cafe to pay the bills. The owner lets me hang my paintings there." "No more housekeeping?" She shook her head. "No. That chapter is closed." Mark nodded, understanding the gentle boundary she was drawing. "Would you show me your other pieces?" They walked through the gallery together, close but not touching. Rose explained her techniques, her inspirations. Mark listened, asking questions, genuinely interested. The awkwardness gradually melted away, replaced by the easy conversation they had once shared over dinner preparations and architectural drawings. Outside, the evening had turned cool. Street lamps cast a golden glow over the sidewalk as they stood at the gallery entrance. "I should go," Rose said, though she made no move to leave. Mark gathered his courage. "I've been thinking about you," he admitted. "Not just tonight, every day." Her expression softened. "Mark. I know. It's complicated. There's history." He ran a hand through his hair. "But I can't help wondering if we could start again. Not as employer and employee. Just as two people who see the world in the same way." Rose was quiet for a long moment. "I've missed you," she finally said. "The talks we had. The way you understood things without me having to explain." "Have coffee with me," he suggested. "Just coffee, nothing more. We can talk about art and architecture and whatever else comes to mind." A smile tugged at her lips. "Just coffee. For now," he said. "The future is unwritten." Rose considered this, then nodded. "There's a place around the corner. They make good espresso." They walked side by side, not quite touching but somehow connected. Mark didn't try to take her hand or rush the moment. They had time now, Time to discover each other properly, to build something that belonged to them alone. As they rounded the corner, Rose glanced up at him. You know, I've been painting a series about homes. Not houses, homes. Places where people feel like they belong. I'd like to see them sometime, Mark said. You will, she promised, and the simple words held the quiet potential of tomorrow.